The question of reality is within all the works. How do we actually make a painting function? How do we make a painting work? How do we make a painting matter? There's so many painters out there dealing with this question all the time. How do you create a work that can still progress painting on a little? So as I said earlier on, there's a clear lineage I see of progression in painting, and I really want to try and add to this line in the progression of work. But I still believe in realism. That's the bizarre thing, because if I'm very honest with myself, when I go to the museums, I take notes sometimes when I go to the MoMA or a modern museum, and I take notes of what images really affected me, what works. And nearly always it's humanist works. It's a painting of a human figure doing something. It's not a very conceptual work, this is usually the work that affects me. So I have to be very honest and go, okay, that's my subject matter. That this still affects a somewhat fateful realism rather than abstraction effects. As Francis Bacon said, and I would agree with this, that abstraction is too easy a way out. You know, so at the time when de Kooning and all the boys in America were doing their abstract work, Bacon was going, no, let's fuse, because I do believe a huge part of Bacon's work is abstraction. Those backgrounds are very abstract. But there's a fusion between the Rothko-like quality of the colour harmony of his work, how the tones in those works sets the plateau for how you experience it. So these deep red backgrounds, for example. But then the figures put on them still are tied to a realism. But then this realism is destroyed through tearing apart the figure, reforming it again. And then the paint itself put on top of this takes on another reality, where you have the paint is representing something, but at the same time it's also just representing itself as a medium. So you have so many worlds meeting in Bacon's work. Colliding is what I was saying. That's why the exhibition is called Collision, with Annette Schneider in Bremen, is because it's the collision of these different realities coming together. Abstraction, realism, the paint itself, the figure, and then the figure dissolving. So even though if I was painting you, I would start with an image of you, but I would have no reason to paint all of you. I wouldn't see it as necessary. I would only have to paint a section of you. And this to me would maybe potentially give me all I need to trap some quality of you, but also to take on board everything that's happened in painting since Titian. You know, key people being Giacometti, Bacon and Picasso for me, in bringing painting to a much further level. Like, you know, I'm sure you've read on this, that if it wasn't for Picasso, you wouldn't have Bacon. You know, it wouldn't have been possible. If it wasn't for Toulouse-Lautrec and Degas and Cézanne and the African sculptures and the sculptures from Papua New Guinea, you wouldn't have had Picasso. There's this clear line in the development of our experience of the human face, the body, and how it's been destroyed and reformed over the past few decades. And I really want to try and play a part in that now and try and add to this line. That's the ultimate goal before I die, is can I add a few paintings to this long lineage I see. If I can add 5 or 10 paintings, that's mission accomplished for me, you know. That'd be great.
Oh, and when I first visited you in your studio, I was impressed about the books lying on the ground, the posters, the postcards from different museums, from different exhibitions. Which role does art history and the old masters play for your works today?
As you can see from the studio, the walls, and the books here, I surround myself constantly with the images necessary to create whatever work I'm working on at that time. And those images can come from Francis Bacon, they could come from a present-day painter, or they could go all the way back to Titian. And the reason for that is that I don't see the progression of painting and the progression of the figure in the way that it's often presented. It's compartmentalized into separate eras. In museums as well, it's all separate. I don't see it that way. I would be much closer to the Barnes collection, if you know this collection in America, where everything was put together in a mixed way. This is my vision, truly, of painting. That Titian is just as relevant now as he was then. He's just as revolutionary. But the most important thing is that what traps this feeling of presence within a painting when you're working with a figure. This is the thing that makes me decide which artists I look at and which I don't. So in the lineage of painters, I see Titian, Caravaggio to a certain extent, going on up to Degas, skip a few years, going on to Chardin, Degas, and Degas on to Toulouse-Lautrec, Picasso, and Goya, of course, and Giacometti. All of these people have one thing in common, that is they release the material in a new way. The oil paint or sculpture or whatever they work in is used in a new way to trap human presence. And this is the connection.
We've been talking about the inspiration by the old masters, but if we look at other works, there's also great inspiration by movies. Some of the works work cineastic in a way, as if we were looking at a still, a frozen picture from a movie. So what about the influence cinema?
Yeah, there's two roles that the cinema plays. One is that television and cinema, I believe, is one of the main ways that the mind is shaped today by images. So it's very difficult for an artist to ignore the power of cinema and television. It has a huge influence on the contemporary mind. So in a way, I take images from this. Some of the images are from the 30s, the 20s, or earlier, or the 40s, and I reconfigure them and completely recontextualize the image within the painting. And the painting then itself might be painted in an old style. So once again, history is played with. So even though you have an image from the 1930s, it might be painted in a style from 1700, but then it also has a contemporary edge as well. So time doesn't really exist in the images. And in a way, that's the thing I notice when I'm in museums, is that great works, the sense of time is removed. There is no time. So in this particular piece, we have a piece which I've called The End of Hollywood for Marie. And similar to the Rider work, it's the point where a woman realizes that she's not going to make it as an actress and that she has to give up on her dream. And part of the thing that comes to mind for this is I was very impressed by David Lynch in Twin Peaks when I was younger. It really affected me how you had this picture perfect environment, but underneath was all this darkness and sexual tension in these chocolate box lives. You know, and in a way that's more true to life than the life we often present to people. So you have the hair, you know, part of this would be a homage to David Lynch, that you have this beautiful hair, you know, done in locks like in the 50s. And of course, most importantly, the question of presence. So the canvas is left empty. I could have continued her clothes, but I decided that no, this is enough as it is. It has arrived at a very powerful presence. Here is another work which addresses this question of a moment in a person's life where they meet a crossroads. An event takes place that completely alters them, similar to the actors and actresses. And when I saw this scene, it really summed up what I wanted to do. The scene originally, the image I looked at, didn't have any snow or rain, And I just added this in because I thought of moments in people's lives if they cry and it's raining, no one sees the tears on your face when you're actually in the rain. And I really like this poetic idea of placing this figure that is running away from some event in their life, as many people are, and the snow is falling into their eyes as they're running.
So what are the things you're mostly impressed by if you're looking at a Goya picture
or a present day work as well? Yeah, the things I'm most impressed by would be, as I said, it's the quality of the craftsmanship within the work. So how well a person knows how to use their material, whether that is film, sculpture, painting. You can really see when a person knows their craft and their skill, and when they've worked very hard at it. And then it's even more enjoyable when they hang a very interesting philosophy on top of this, or idea. It's such a joy to look at. As I mentioned to you before, the lot of artists coming out of Romania I find very interesting. There's obviously some magic going on in the school there, because you've many artists I really enjoy coming from there.
Looking at this picture on the wall, you're showing a writer in a certain situation.
Yes.
So can you tell us about the feelings and the situations you want to show? If you do it like here with that writer, or you did it in another way with actors?
Yes. Following on from the previous point we talked about, in a lot of work I find it to be very disengaged from the general human experience of life, the things that really matter to us, the things that truly affect our lives and create a crossroads that we can never turn back from. So this could be death, this could be failure, this could be joy, many different things. But to me, these are the events to potentially record and work on. If I want to bring a humanist element back to art that truly engages with the everyday person, I decided to give stories to my images that would really create an interest for me, and maybe be a story that many people could relate to. So this particular piece is a writer who actually is working as a security guard. It's very cold at night time, and he realizes his books are never going to be published. And so when I saw this image initially, it's a photo from 1920, 1930 that I saw on the computer. I went, this looks like, this is what I saw. I said, this image, I can really do something with this. So it's trapped in that very internal moment where this person realizes it's not going to happen. My dream will not be realized. And we all experience this in some way or other in our life. Outside of that, the most important thing, of course, is that the paint hopefully is beautiful. The fabric is painted in the style of Velázquez with a special medium that I make myself, sun oil, which was taught to me by a medium artist in America who I learned it from, also called Velázquez, actually. And he studied this for 10 years and done great research on uncovering how to create sun oil and to create this translucent quality in the paint that you see in many works of Velázquez.
You've been talking about turning points in people's lives and key events, and now we're sitting in front of a painting which is a homage to Caspar David Friedrich, The Monk by the Sea. And yesterday we were talking about a key event in his life, that was the death of his brother, who was drowning in the ice when Caspar David Friedrich was still a little boy. And you said that in your opinion some of his works are like dealing with that personal biography, with that dramatic events in his life. You went to National Gallery more than 15 times, and you were looking very close to the Monk by the Sea.
Yeah, probably 1 hour each time. I would just be very close like this, going, okay, that's done that way, that's done, yeah. Each time, 1 hour, I'd say.
And you were doing some you checked up the colors and
yes, many palettes created of different colors. Many were wrong.
You compared them with your palettes.
Yes, yeah, until I got it right. Yeah.
So it's a way Caspar David Friedrich painted, but you're also interested in his relationship to nature. There are so many paintings, romantic paintings, or especially paintings by Caspar David Friedrich, who deal with that subject, the man in front of nature, and also the gap which is between man and nature.
Yeah. Definitely.
So what is the philosophical idea about your work in correspondence with romantic art?
Well, I think with Caspar David Friedrich, the reason he's so popular now, I don't think it's just because curators and writers, similar to yourself, who are very passionate about Caspar David Friedrich, have come behind him and all of a sudden he's well known for the past 20 years. I think there's genuinely something happening within the psychology of present day people, that they react to his work, that this distance you were speaking of, this gap between the human being and nature, is very much at the forefront of what we in the Western world are experiencing. Nature is something we see on television, in National Geographic. Even when we're in nature, it doesn't feel natural, as they say in the movie Trainspotting, when they all go travelling out and the guy goes, "It's not natural!" You know, when they actually go out into the countryside and they go straight back to the city. Mm-hmm. I have experienced that. I don't know what you would call that, but that is something I experienced. And when you look at Caspar's work, you actually see a relationship to nature that we've maybe lost, and sometimes we re-engage with. At those moments when we truly re-engage with ourselves in a good way, we know when those moments happen. And it's usually when we've been away for maybe a week, we've had a holiday, and we really feel connected to the quietness around us. And something inside ourselves, a commune happens between ourself and the inner self that is quite good. And I think especially within this particular work, Monk by the Sea, that is the event being recorded. Something's happening internally in this person, and you have the awe and the wonder of the huge expanse of clouds and the light just coming over the edge of these clouds. And maybe the sense of loss that we feel in nature also. I'm sure when you look at his work, you often see that the point that we are so infinitely small when it really comes down to the question of existence. So it's also this question and philosophy of both the futility of existence, and then that you still mean something. I think it's that big question in Caspar's work is what I find interesting.
For Caspar David Friedrich, there was also a religious aspect in paintings The Monk by the Sea. He really was a religious man, and he found God, he found his dimension of religion in nature. What is it for you today?
I battled long and hard with the question of God, and much of my old work used to deal with this question. And the question of, if you believe in God, you see life very differently. If one is confronted with death and you believe in God, death is a very different thing to you. But if you don't believe in God, death is finite, of course, and it makes your experience of life and the things you value, I think, quite different. And I suppose for me, painting is my way of communicating with existence and the fact that I will die. So this is what I will leave behind, and I'm very aware of that when I'm doing the work. That's constantly there, that I will pass the same as anybody else. So I just hope that I can leave one or two works that will stand testament to that I once lived. Another point that is brought up by your question is a thing I call the God principle, which is that when people marvel at something that a human being did, whether they're a politician, a leader, they sacrifice their lives to save someone, or they create a great work. And I believe what they're marveling at, when some people say this is God, they go, it truly must be God that this happened. But I think what they're marveling at is the question that it's the God, what I call the God principle within us, that a human being the same as you did that. And this is the great question that we are confronted with, that we all have the capability of doing really great things if we really strive for it. So I don't believe in God as maybe Castor David Frederick did, but I see the idea of the God principle in human beings a lot, which is encouraging.
In your work, you're very close to Castor David Frederick. And is it passion? Is it obsession?
Well, with this particular work, you could say it was both, because I have done studies of other works before, but never to this much detail, never to examining every aspect of the painting and really trying to get the colours so close. But the reason I wanted to do that was I found, as I have tried to reteach myself to paint over the past 3 years, starting with Velázquez and Van Dyck, and now this piece with Castor David Frederick, I found that to really go into their world, you learn so much. You walk away knowing how to paint a sky in this way, knowing how to, like you see here, this tone here is one tone, and that was from looking at his work. It's like a watercolour wash, and that's let dry, and then over that you pull these very soft scumbles of light, and it creates this sense of air in the painting. And one can only do that if you truly give yourself over to the painter. It's like being a conduit for a spirit, you know? So it's like I'm there saying, okay, look, if I really have no ego and just give myself up completely, I will learn a lot. And, if Manet did it and Titian did it and all these people studied other people, why shouldn't contemporary artists have the same respect? So they can learn and try and do good things.
So we've seen some of your paintings with actors, with the artists, so human figure is very important for your paintings. There are only some without figures. Even the monk by the sea has that small figure on the left side. So here we have a diptych without persons, only landscape, and in a way you painted it before and after. Landscape without and landscape in fire. So what was your idea about this tool?
This is a series I would like to do a number of. So it's by taking one aspect out of an image, how the image completely changes itself. And the question came up for me, this was created around 2 years ago. It was this whole question of dealing with the reality of painting. And one of the things I wrote, I've written on this a little bit, and other artists speak about, like Gerhard Richter spoke about the question of reality. That he came to the realization that when he was painting a painting, there was no point in trying to paint reality, because the object itself became reality. This has its own reality in and of itself. And I found that a really interesting comment, because I've discovered that as I go on, that the entity, the painting itself, if it arrives at something of value, has an entity in it that's trapped, a presence, once again, that's trapped. And that presence can be a landscape, it can be a figure, etc. So within this particular work on the fire and the landscape, I found this image on the internet. It was a very small image, very bad quality, just an image someone took, I think, of their own house, maybe, and a fire was coming to the house. And when I blocked out the fire, this looked like an idyllic landscape. And I went, there's one of the answers that answers the question of painting. Within these two works, hopefully, a philosophical, aesthetic question is answered or is explored in this diptych, where here you have this quite peaceful, but quite El Greco sky. It's very tumultuous. Tumultuous is quite storm-like. But you can't see a fire, so it looks quite calm. And then the exact same image with the fire brought in, it plays, when the viewer hopefully sees this, their whole reality is played with. And this also brings up the interesting question that a friend of mine is exploring, Enda O'Donoghue, an Irish painter here in Berlin, where he recently did an image of exact same image, 12 times, of a man's watch on a suit. And each one is painted slightly differently. 12 panels altogether. And it's this question of multi-layered realities at the same time. It's also a question coming up in science. So just like people are exploring something in art, at the same time the questions are being explored in science. Is there 2, 3, 4 realities existing at the same time?
Well, you told me that movies and cinema is also a very important influence for you.
Mm-hmm.
For this painting you used a movie still from a
1930s, I'd say.
1930s.
Yeah.
And it's a father-son relation, which you show here. And we've been talking about a philosophical dimension in the work, but it seems to me that there's also a psychological dimension in the work.
Yeah. When you look at really, when portraiture really works, whether it's in Rembrandt, Goya, etc., it's not just that the paint is very beautiful and how it's used is beautiful. They really, building on that point we made earlier on presence, for presence to be successful, sometimes there has to be psychological intent and a psychological content to the work. And what I mean by intent is that you are imposing on that head, whether it's the head of the young man here, the son, or the father, you're imposing on that a full story, trying to create a full personality profile that encapsulates that head and is quite distinct from this head, for example. So here you have the experience of a man who's 60, who's 70, 75 years old. Here you have a man who's only 35, maybe. And you can see the delicacy of the flesh hanging on the skin. But also, even though the eyes aren't depicted, which is on purpose, you still have a sense of life experience in both these characters, especially the older man. But any successful portraits I've seen, they have this. It could be quite a one-dimensional or two-dimensional character, like in Titian, where you just have people, like in the photo here, where you just have people representing a god, and it could be Bacchus holding his wine, or Aphrodite, and they are just representing beauty or love itself. But even within that, it fully becomes that word. It fully becomes that sensation or personality. Within these works, obviously, you're dealing with a lot more. Like in Degas' portraits, you learn so much from these. And in Velázquez, the humanist quality to both works. There's no airs or graces. The king is just painted as a man in fancy clothes. And I think that's the thing we really react to. Is that even though there's all these jewels hanging on him, he's the exact same as the king, the dwarf, the famous dwarf paintings that he did. An equal amount of attention is given to that person's life, their experiences, all shown through the eyes and the face and the lines on the face. And by approaching this in the correct way, you can really harness an energy that hopefully defeats the material that it's on. So this is only canvas, this is paint, and yet we can put something on there that appears to be breathing. But it doesn't have to be realism like in Francis Bacon's work. These works are undeniably, for me, breathing. There's a life force in them that even though they may be made 30, 40 years ago, they feel there's this energy trapped in the painting. So this is the big question that faces me all the time when I paint people.
We've been talking about craftsmanship, we've been talking about painting techniques, producing art, but it seems that for you this is much more than a profession or a job or the production of paintings and pieces of art. So what is the motor that keeps you running?
As I explained earlier on, it's definitely not a profession. Because it's something I've had to keep returning to, even if I didn't want to, for the past 10, 12 years. Sometimes I've not wanted to work as an artist, but I just keep going back to it. And I also keep going back to painting. rather than photography and sculpture, which I've also worked in. It's always painting I go back to because it's the quietest practice. It whispers to you when you look at a painting. So it's also very delicate and intimate philosophy to engage in, because I do see it as a philosophy. If you know, politics has its place within constructing society, religion has its place, and art very much has a place as well. And I believe art can play a very powerful role when utilised correctly. So when I come in here as a politician, a philosopher, as just a humanist, which is very important to me. Not so much a religious point of view, but you could say maybe self-realization being a goal. That all my work is made from this point of view. It's not just to make a picture. There is a whole philosophy why I would do any work. So this work here, along with other works, like the New York Trader has Heart Attack on 42nd Street. Within these, you have the image of the question of death, and maybe a near-death experience, where a person gets to see potentially themselves past, but then they go back into their bodies. I've seen documentaries on this that I find very interesting, because even though I don't believe in God, I still want to believe there's a chance maybe we have a soul. So when I hear these stories, which are very factual, and I like that, they're scientific and factual, and they record what they saw when they floated above their body, I find this very interesting. So when I take an image like this, which once again is from another image, but I left out everything around her, and I just have her floating as if she's ascending up to something. And also with the New York Traders, there's so many questions brought up that are philosophical, that are maybe religious, and hopefully they trigger these questions within us. So in some documentaries I've seen on the question of death and the spirit, and is there potentially something after, and you see these documentaries where people remember floating above their body, seeing everything that was happening in the room, and then they return back to the body after a period of time of maybe travelling towards a light, which is recorded by many people, etc. I find these really interesting because I don't believe in a God necessarily, but I really want to believe that maybe there is a soul or a spirit. It would be great if there was. But so even though I don't fully partake in this as a philosophy or an idea, I want to play with it still. And so when I take images like this, what I see is this lady ascending up. When I do the New York Stock Exchange guys, I see that he is having this experience looking at his body and how it will alter his life once he sees it. So once again, it still connects back with the writers and the actresses. It's an event that changes their life. So it's only after time though that I see this. I walk into the studio and I go, that's what I'm painting. I don't actually realise why I'm attracted to all these images. It's not until later when I see them up on the wall that I actually go, this is what I'm doing in all these images. And I still don't know the reason why.